Welcome to the IT Matters podcast, hosted by Opkalla. We're an IT advisory firm that makes technology easy for your business. Our vendor-neutral technology advisors work directly with your team to assess technology needs and procure the best IT solutions for your organization. On this podcast, expect high-level expertise from our hosts, plus experience-driven perspective from the leading experts on topics like AI, cybersecurity, industry-focused IT solutions, strategy, and more. Now, let's get into today's discussion on what matters in IT.
And welcome back to the IT Matters podcast, hosted by Opkalla. At Opkalla, we help IT teams understand the busy marketplace of technology, strategy, and services with a data-driven approach. On this podcast, we invite technology leaders to discuss the challenges facing the modern IT department. My name is Keith Hawkey, technology advisor at Opkalla. And today, we are joined by Shane Creech, who is currently the Vice President of Information Technology at OB Hospitalist Group, where he leads enterprise technology strategy across clinical operations, infrastructure, data security, and innovation. Shane has guided organizations through cloud-first transformations, major interoperability shifts, and even national-scale cyber events. What makes Shane's perspective especially valuable is that he's done this work across nearly every IT leadership seat: CIO, VP of IT, infrastructure, cloud leader, spanning healthcare, higher education. He's led service desk insourcing and built enterprise analytics teams from scratch, constantly bridging the gap between technology and the business it serves. Today, we'll talk about what it actually takes to lead IT in high-stakes environments, how technology leaders should think about cloud, AI, and resilience right now, and what Shane has learned when the pressure is real and the lights have to stay on. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Keith. It's a fantastic introduction. It certainly sounds possibly more awesome than maybe reality is, but thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's definitely a pleasure. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of things, we have a little game that we typically play. It's a little more lighthearted. Have you ever played True Truths and a Lie?
Personally, probably not, but have I been in social settings where we have played? Absolutely.
Well, this is a Two Truths and a Lie based on the most recent CES event, Consumer Electronics. I don't know what the S stands for, but the big event they have where there's a bunch of innovative consumer toys and electronics. So I'll list three different possible electronics that were there, and I'll see if you can guess the one that is completely fabricated.
Fantastic. All right.
All right. So first is an emotion sensing car horn that adjust honk volume and tone based on whether you're angry, passive aggressive, or just exhausted.
Impressive.
That is number one. Second, a baby panda robot named An, a cuddly robot pet designed to respond to touch and provide companionship for older adults, blending cuteness with assistive tech. And number three is a Lego Smart Play brick, a real 2x4 Lego brick with sensors, lights, and sounds interactivity, bringing physical play into the smart era. So we've got a motion sensing car horn, a baby robot that consoles and assists, panda robot that assists the elderly, and a Lego Play smart brick.
Those are good. So I'm going to go for the one that seems least plausible, at least to me, because I don't see the practical goodness for humanity. I'll go for the motion sensing car horn.
As much as I would love for that to be true, that was a completely fabricated device that I made up. However, wouldn't it be fun to be on the road and you hear the different car horns based on the actual emotional deposition of each driver?
Yeah. This will probably give away a bit, at least in the era I grew up. But they used to have in older cars, you could have like a multi-tone horn or a horn that would play like MIDI music style of tone. So you could essentially select, one or three different type of honk types. So, I mean, the technology has actually been there for probably quite a time.
Yeah, speaking of quite a time, you've spent quite a time in IT and technology, Shane. How did you begin this career? What were the early beginnings? How did you become a practitioner in the space?
Oh, so probably an interesting story of coming into IT, and blends into, as you said, now I'm in healthcare IT for most of my adult life now. But when I was coming up through high school, IT wasn't much of a thing people invested in. There wasn't a lot of technology really integrated within business. The old times when IT started off is, you'd probably find it in some executive spaces. People maybe did some financial trading or watched, financial markets. Did some basic, we'll call computer asset tracking stuff and ordering and things like that. So, much to a lot of people's, I think, surprise when they find out about my career is I thought I was going to be a medical laboratory technician. That's, I was 100% convinced that was my future. Having an engineering background and just an innate curiosity in that space, that really seemed like it was a great fit. I found out real early, I'm not one for blood, so medical laboratory technician wasn't really a great fit for my future. But what I did see in that space was there was a whole lot of technology-backed stuff, and just, I think, in leading up to that, really got involved in working with people in high school doing bulletin board systems and early communication systems. And really cultivated a community of, just learning and early computer science stuff that to me was like a whole brand new world of fascination and excitement that also kind of, I think, sparked that engineering mindset. And, as I tend to tell people, the rest is history. And I just kind of jumped full force into it, and there really wasn't a technology that, I was exposed to or that would come up that, I wasn't fascinated by and just couldn't, help myself to learn more about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the IT leaders that we have on actually had some varied beginnings that stumbled into IT. It's funny enough, I actually have a lot of people on that came from a military background, and they dealt with military technology, and that's how they moved themselves into the private enterprise of IT. And it is interesting how a lot of paths lead this direction, considering of how important it is to organizations to have competent people that keep the lights on, really, and they're the backbone to their organizations. You've spent some time in healthcare over the last few years. What is something that about being an IT leader in healthcare that people outside of the role don't almost never understand?
Yeah, that's a great question, and kind of as you dissect that and think about it, I think something that comes to mind really is, it's my history within the role, because it's greatly changed over the years. So how I probably would have answered that, a decade or two ago is vastly different than how I'd answer it today. But probably in the most common way, I'd say, most people probably think healthcare IT is, the same as, whatever they think IT is anywhere else. And, it's really about, data protection, keeping the lights on, system uptime, right? That's probably, I'd say for years, that's really what IT teams were measured against. You were a successful team if you did keep the lights on and if the system was always available for the user to interact with the system and do whatever, whatever thing that system actually provided for the organization. In the healthcare space, I think the thing that's greatly different when you think about that question is, you could have the system there, it can be on, people can interact with it, and that's actually like the table stakes of the job. So that's not the importance. That's certainly not how, any of my past employers in the last 10 years have actually measured, success of any IT team I've led. It's really about, today being able to help the users unlock the functionality within the technology so that it becomes a tool that enables them to get, either more done, meet, increasing demand and capacity, get work done faster, perhaps. I think when I think about that question, that's probably the interesting piece, because if I was in manufacturing, it probably quite simply is, the system just has to be up, because if the system's up, then we're generating whatever out the back end that is counted as success. But in healthcare, that's just vastly different. And I think for anybody that's not in healthcare, just the depth and complexity of a regulated environment is probably something, would be, you don't understand it probably until you have to live with it or live in it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've probably experienced what we would call a bad day in a bad day on the job, and with your tenured career, I'm curious of like how does a bad day look today compared to what it did 5-10 years ago, and any war stories that an IT leader that maybe hasn't gone down your path, but they can learn from, that resonates with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just kind of hit, I think, the front end of that question and think about, again, 10 or 15 years ago, a bad day might have been, geez, there was a system outage that lasted a day, maybe 3 days. Maybe in a real bad case, maybe it lasted for a week. And that was your bad day or set of bad days together. Not that wouldn't be catastrophic today, because it certainly would. It wouldn't make for a great day, but I think to a greater degree, a bad day in modern times really isn't so much, again, about keeping the lights on simply. It's, a bad day is really defined by, did I bring the right technologies forward to the business that actually solve the problem, that they're trying to solve. And probably even more importantly than that is, I could probably solve any business problem with a dozen technologies, but some technologies, frankly, require the business to change, work dynamics or workflows in order for them to unlock the value of the technology. So, I'd probably quantify, today's bad day would be if I didn't put in the hard work, I think, to understand what the business was trying to accomplish and, led them down a bad path or a bad investment in technology. That's a bad day in how I would look at it today, just simply from the impact perspective of it may be a bad day today, but I'm going to continue to live with the result of that bad day for, maybe the next 5 years. If it was a sizable investment, they're not going to reinvest. We're going to have to figure out, or try to figure out, how to make it work. So I think that's, it's a complexity problem. And that's how I would think about the bad day today. Yesterday, it was just, it was today. Was it a good day today? Did the system stay up today? And today, it's the vast difference is, well, did I actually understand what you needed? Because if I didn't, it's more than a bad day today. It's a bad day for the next 5 years.
36 months of bad days, or 60 months of bad days.
Yes, and I've
Reminders of a previous time, reminders of an evaluation.
yeah, and and to bring that out into practical sense into the second part of your question, I could probably go back as early as just talking with different folks about cloud ambitions, just to kind of get into the hype cycle. Cloud has kind of started, I think, to come off the backside. Most people, see SaaS, infrastructure as a service, as just normal courses of doing business. But back in the early days when that began, most businesses, kind of like AI today, boards got hit to executive teams of, hey, I think this is a great way to save money on this IT spend. Let's go to the cloud. Everybody's doing it, right? So a lot of people ran full force into let's do the cloud everything. And I would consistently talk to folks that, were kind of in the beginning, mid part of their journey. Maybe they have had some starts and stops, but they were starting to kind of feel the bad day scenario, right? Because they're like, I'm not seeing that this is going to save money. This is, what they wanted me to do was to do this because they were going to save money, but I'm not realizing savings. So, when I think about it in a practical sense of, turning that into, a real tangible story, that was one where I'd say, if you didn't understand how the technology is used, how you would apply it, to the problem, save money, you could end up with some really unintended results. And, the big thing in the cloud space that became, I think, interesting, hindsight 2020 was really that cost savings didn't materialize because, again, the pace of the business continued. It did allow IT groups to service the business in a much quicker manner. But what really happened in respect to that is the business became ultra consumers. So instead of the old pace that was kind of hampered by the traditional purchasing process and, buying hardware, racking and stacking hardware, getting it ready to go, putting an application on it, I mean, all that used to take months. So it would, in essence, create a little bit of an artificial roadblock for the business going extremely fast or spending money really quickly. The cloud era, took that from months to literally hours, sometimes just days. So then the pace that, the organization could spend money just quickened. So in most organizations, really that realization was they intended to save money, but what they didn't do is really look at the process around implementing the technology and what that caused. And that's how most people ended up actually burning through what they thought was a cost savings, just simply by just consuming more.
Thus is the potential graveyard for so many IT leaders today. It's one of those roles that you're intricately tied to the technology the business operates on. You're in charge of understanding brand new revelations in technology, revolutions. Cloud was one of those revolutions. At the time, you're not very well equipped to have all of the insight into how this works, especially 5 years ago, especially 7 years ago. So there's a lot of IT leaders that went by the wayside that they're blamed for potential mistake, and they went. The vendor had all of these ROI documents and how they're going to save this amount of money, and they made it sound so nice. It just reminds me of, because I exist in the partner space for my day job, of trying to cut through some of the salesmanship that happens, because I've seen many IT leaders kind of live and die by these poor decisions that get locked in long-term contracts. And like you said, it's a spigot that sometimes only goes one way especially with cloud spend. And I see this paradigm reinventing itself within the generative AI space today. I mean, it's going to be the exact same cycle. It's even more complicated than shifting your infrastructure to basically just another data center that has a different cost model. It's unproven. I see it constantly. Actually, I think most organizations are still fairly tepid around making big investments. They really want to start extremely small, so at least that's helpful. But it's going to be another one of those cycles where there's going to be a lot of IT leaders, either they're made or unmade within this hype cycle of AI.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably been the majority of my conversations the last 2 years specifically. Again, just coming from the cloud space and watching that paradigm happen. And I'd say there's some important learnings to not end up in the, I used to be an IT leader category. And that's really, I think if you shift out of, just the pressure cauldron, the board says, I need this thing. That's fantastic. But, you work in the partner space and you know this as well as anyone. It's like, well, let's dive into that. So you want it. Let's define what the want actually is. What are you trying to achieve? You want AI, but what's the business value proposition that's going to be created here? And then, again, I think start to dissect that, come to that mutual understanding of, okay, so this is what we're working towards. This is the value proposition we're going to try to drive from a business value proposition perspective, not, IT uptime or, something that doesn't really matter, but this is the thing we're going to chase, to use it in the cloud space. Let's say it was cost savings, because there were people that did save money in cloud, and here's how they did it. Because I helped people do it. I'm sure in the space, if you were in the partner space at that time, you probably also witnessed people did save money. And the way they did it is, okay, we're gonna save money. That's kind of the business value proposition. And then, you break down like a partner does, is let's understand everything that drives cost. So then you go through the pain of documenting all of that stuff that drives the cost in the cloud space. And you come up with a fairly extensive list, and a lot of that stuff is just, it's process, it's procedural. Of course, there's technology, there's people, there's all of that kind of stuff. And then, you actually make the moves to start enacting change. And a lot of it has nothing to do with technology change, for as cool as it sounds. A lot of it's process and people. Mm-hmm. So you make those process and people changes, and then you make the small adjustments as you see the value prop either come to life. Either I'm spending a little bit more, I'm spending a little bit less. The people that didn't end up spending more ended up adopting things like, I have a test environment that I only turn on because I test one time a year. So, in my old IT environment, that was a piece of infrastructure, I just left it on. In the cloud environment, I could turn it off and not pay for it. So the operational paradigm shift was turn it off. And then money savings happens. That's just a real simple example, I think, when you apply it to the cloud space. I see the same thing really happening in the AI space today. It really comes into, it's like, well, AI can do a lot of things. What do we want it to do? And what I've commonly told people today, because I've heard some people say, well, there's this notion that we can, save money with people. We can get rid of people or somehow supplant people with AI technology. And what I think the early goers that have kind of pushed hard into that space have found out really quickly, just like early cloud adopters, is you can, but it's not really the core application or the benefit of applying that particular piece of technology. It's really, it's more about speed, it's amplification of existing skill sets, it's everything really but replacing people. So if you're a growing organization and your growth curve has been to put more people at growth, yeah, you can apply AI in the people savings aspect more than likely, to automate process and people type of tasks, and then you can kind of bend the curve. You're going to spend a portion of that savings in obviously the technology to make that amplification, but you should probably realize a net savings over, salary benefits, for instance. So when I think about what's going to separate the people that are, tomorrow's, leaders that are going to be cheered in the hallways for helping an organization really take this maddening, AI drumbeat that's probably coming out of the boardroom in the executive team conference room. It's really going to be those people that can lean in, understand and deconstruct really what's the business value proposition we're trying to drive, and then be that constant partner. So you can't take the order, in the classic sense like we used to 20 years ago, go in the back room, work for months, and then generate the thing and go ta-da. Because the business probably has going to made 5 or 6 iterations in that time period that you've been in the back room. So everything has to be done in the front room, constantly iterating, kind of getting in that fast dev, hyper improvement mindset, and constantly making small iterations. And I think the folks that do that and navigate it more from a partner mindset are going to be highly successful.
Yeah. I mean, you interact with the boardroom, with the leadership committee that is in charge of the business direction quite often. What are you hearing? What do you think the disconnect is between what a board of directors thinks AI should do and what is feasible in the near term? Like what are some of these grand ideas that maybe you've heard, and how do you bring them down to a consumable, low-hanging fruit, a landing place without putting the company too much at risk? Do you have any experience with that paradigm?
Yeah. This is it's gonna sound really dorky, Keith. What I'm gonna say, it comes down to me. It comes down to metrics that matter, and here's how I'll bring it to life. I'll talk about cloud because, that may be more applicable to some people in recent memory and also AI. But, in the cloud space, in the early going, really the metric that people thought mattered was how much of your, IT infrastructure portfolio or app portfolio was in the cloud. The higher the number, the better. That was the false metric. So that was the metric most people who ended up failing, that's the one they chased. All aspects, everything be damned, get everything into the cloud. The higher the metric, the better. And it simply wasn't the case. I think when you kind of look at AI, and it's really kind of come up even internally to our conversations real early on. We had a metric that went to our board, and it was really just kind of an inventory or a count of well, how many AI things are you doing? And that was the metric early on that mattered, because if that number was low, it was, well, you're not doing enough. If that number was really high, it's like, oh well, you must be really forward thinking. You must be out there doing great things. And what what we've shifted from in that space is, we've kind of pulled back. I have like a top 3 to 5 opportunities, where we can apply AI to help our organization. And that's really what we track to. It's like, what's the progress on those things? And let's talk about what we've learned. I mean, there have been some things we thought we were going to get business value out of. Those things have come true. There's been obviously some things we thought we were going to get business value out of. And, real early on, it's like, well, it's not really taking hold. We're not seeing it. So then, when I talk about those micro corrections, that's when you have honest conversations and you say, is it possible to achieve this with this particular technology? Are we thinking about it correctly? Is there a different way to approach it that, we may be able to obtain this value that we think we're chasing? So I think, when I kind of think about it holistically from that perspective, it's, it comes down to, it's metrics. Are you measuring the right thing and looking at it from the right perspective to actually know whether or not you're moving things in the right direction?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, if you were going, Shane, if you were going to tell a younger IT leader who's maybe in his or her first management or director role, a trend that you believe is going to matter enormously in the next 5 years that most IT leaders are currently underestimating. What trend, what advice would you give that younger IT leader?
What I would probably say is it's easy to get caught up in the hype because it's the thing that in every one-on-one with your direct report, or if you get some boardroom exposure, it'll be the thing that they're talking about. What I tell people is don't just listen to what's said, but dig into the context of what's being talked about or being asked about. Relentlessly pursue that and understand what it really is. And then, dig in and find out then how to solve that particular problem or do whatever that is. We operate today in a high growth organization. So for us, regardless of what it is somebody may be asking me for on the top side, at the end of the day, it's always, what am I doing that enables the organization to grow in a more scalable fashion? When I started in the organization, we were much smaller than what we are today. We've been in a very high growth curve. So for us, it's been about how do you not just fashion the organization to scale, but how do you fashion the organization to scale effectively?
Yeah,
so
that's very well said. We have a lot of younger listeners that are always looking to pick the brain of those that have traveled this path and have been successful. So I'm sure that sentiment will be well received, Shane. We're starting to come up on time here. Where can our listeners find you if they have any questions? What is a good way to reach out? Is there a particular platform that's the best way to reach out to Shane Creech?
Best way to find Shane Creech. I have minimized my digital footprint being in this industry long enough for my own sanity. Everybody in my family would be thankful for that at this point. But I am happily and easily found on LinkedIn. So please look me up, Shane Creech, on LinkedIn, and you can connect with me there. And always happy to either share war stories or insights on issues that you may be having within your own organization.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure to include Shane's LinkedIn profile link in the show notes. And with that, we will catch you on the next episode of the IT Matters podcast. Thank you, Shane, for taking the time to spend with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. It was fun.
Thank you for listening, and we appreciate you tuning into the IT Matters podcast. For support assessing your technology needs, book a call with one of our technology advisors at opkalla.com. That's opkalla.com. If you found this episode helpful, please share the podcast with someone who would get value from it and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Thank you for listening and have a great day.